Hi there, my name is Jake. I'm part of the development team working on Lost Isle. Through our Discord community, we have lots of questions that come through about gameplay or about development, release times, uh, about all kinds of things. And so we wanted to start doing just a regular development Q&A or developer Q&A where we just hop on and answer a few of the questions that have been submitted. We won't always answer all of them. Sometimes we'll answer questions directly through Discord, which people are used to, and we do that all the time. And then other times we'll just hop on a video like this and kind of respond to them in real time through a video. From Discord, we've pulled 4 questions that we're going to talk about today. They're not in any particular order, so we'll just dive right in. One thing just to note is that I didn't ask anyone's permission to use their usernames as they submitted them. So while they did post the questions publicly in Discord, just for the sake of this video, I'll keep everybody anonymous. All right. So question number 1: What made you decide that you wanted to make video games? Were there any specific inspirations, like other games? So this question is kind of just seems like just a general get to know you kind of thing. We've been pretty in the background working on the game, and so nobody in the community really knows anyone that's on the Lost Isle development team at all. So I think this is just one of those questions that's like, who are you guys, and what are you up to, kind of thing. Um, and so obviously everybody on our team is different. There are only 6 of us on the team, and I'll speak mostly for myself, but the short of it is just that we grew up probably just the same way that you did, where video games were pretty much ubiquitous in our childhoods. Um, whether you played on like when I was growing up, the main systems were like Nintendo 64 and PS2. So I played a whole bunch of you know Mario 64, and on the PlayStation I played a whole bunch of like Ratchet and Clank and the Jack series and all that kind of stuff. Uh, and then as uh, and then as I got a little bit older, I got more into PC games. So I kind of moved totally away from consoles, and it's when RuneScape, old school RuneScape, the very first version was out, and I got super heavy into that. Uh, and then that led into World of Warcraft, which as anyone knows, that's kind of an all-consuming game. So I ended up playing that for way too long. And then I eventually got into Dota 2, which I then also got sucked into and played a whole bunch. But it was mostly those 2 games for me for uh, pretty much all of my teenage years. And there's another guy on our team who grew up kind of just on the Nintendo system, but got every single one as they came out with his family. So it was kind of the thing that his family did together with his siblings. He'd get, they started with the N64, and then they moved on to the GameCube and the Wii, and just kept going that way with Game Boys and all that kind of stuff. So his experience with gaming is very much in that world, in the Nintendo world, and didn't branch out very much until adulthood outside of Nintendo. There's another guy who has had every console and PC and everything always, and so he's played a million different games all the time, kind of like little bits of tons of games, and didn't focus so much, kind of like I did, on 1 or 2 games always. So there's very much a varied background in gaming for all of us, but I think the common thread is just that it's what we grew up doing. It's we just have all these very fond memories of um, whatever first game grabbed our attention and was, we experienced this awesome world that took us out of real life and put us somewhere else, and we had so much fun, and it's often tied to the friends that you were with at the time, and all of that kind of thing. And um, so what made us decide to be game developers? Well, I think it's just that. I mean, I think it's that our childhoods and our teenage years and all of that were uh, so much of it was spent playing games and in those worlds that it's just something that we'd like to obviously pass on to other people, and provide the same experience for other people. Um, and then the second part of that question, were there any specific inspirations like other games? Um, Again, since we all played so many different ones, that's kind of hard to narrow down. But for Lost Isle specifically, the game that we're developing now, the game that inspired it the most is definitely Rust. So um, we've got 2 guys on the team who really heavily played a lot of Rust. Spent tons of that was kind of their game for many years, and so when it came time to make our own game, that was the direction that we decided to move in. But obviously, putting a lot of our own twists on it. So yeah, so Rust is definitely the inspiration for Lost Isle. All right, so moving on to question 2: What has been the most surprising player feedback? This one the most surprising player feedback has without a doubt been the request for more lore. Um, and it's not that lore in and of itself is like there's nothing necessarily surprising about lore in and of itself. It's just that in like an open world survival PvP type game, if you were to think about Rust, uh, you don't really take necessarily lore into consideration because all you really want to do is get in there and build your base and take over somebody else's base. And if there's a story about what's going on in the world, it kind of takes a backseat to the gameplay loop. Whereas if you were really into lore, maybe you'd play like an MMORPG or any other kind of RPG that's very much story driven or things like that. So that's definitely been the most surprising bit of player feedback that people get in, and it's been very common. Tons and tons of people have said, the game's pretty cool, but what's the story? Like I want to know more about what's going on in this world. And it makes more sense in our game versus a game like Rust because since our game has a medieval fantasy twist, uh, if you see something like a glowing obelisk that shoots up out of the ground and skeletons spawn around it and it shoots out magic treasure chests that you go and collect. Obviously, players are like, "What is going on? Why is this here?" So people like an explanation for things like that. So it definitely makes sense. We've got stuff like magic wands and staffs, and uh, there's a whole bunch of stuff that would lead to someone wanting to know the background behind those decisions and those mechanics and stuff. So, and it's definitely not that we have anything against adding more lore. Um, it, we actually have a ton of it already written. It's just been kind of sitting on a shelf collecting dust for a long time. And the only reason for that is that we're a pretty small team, and so it just wasn't the priority. It hasn't been the priority um, because we needed to get core mechanics and those kinds of things working. And since we're a small team, there just wasn't enough time to dedicate to expanding on the lore. But now that most of mechanically the game is working pretty much across all systems, and now that we're in kind of a polish phase, we definitely do have more bandwidth now to expand on the lore, and so we're actively doing that right now, which is exciting for me. I get to write a lot of it and kind of implement it into like a quest system or just parts of the world like journals or different collectibles and things, and put little snippets in there for people to learn little bits about the world. But so the lore is definitely something that we're actively working on, and so that's cool feedback to get, that even in an open world survival game that people want that. And so that's something that we're definitely excited to be able to provide for the players who want it. It's definitely all going to be optional. So if you do want to play our game, if you do want to play Lost Isle like Rust, where you just jump in and you do build your base and you go destroy somebody else's base and take all their stuff, and if that's all that you want to do, sweet, you can absolutely do that. But if you do want to learn more about the lore, there's going to be a lot of it, and there are going to be lots of ways to explore it. So it'll be totally optional, but it will be in there, and it will be kind of ever expanding. So that'll be cool. Okay, question number 3. What design decision has caused the most debate on the team? We were talking about this today so that we could kind of narrow it down, and we came down to PvE versus PvP mechanics. And when I say PvE, I don't mean like AI in the game. Like we obviously have like skeletons and different wildlife and stuff like that you can fight, and that's technically PvE. But what I mean is like in terms of multiplayer mechanics. So again, I know I keep going back to Rust, but our game is most similar to Rust and is inspired by Rust. So Rust is, it's a PvP game. So all of pretty much every single mechanical design system decision has been balanced and designed around with PvP in mind, and specifically around some of the exploits and ways to cheese different things that people have found over the years playing a game like Rust, with building and with crafting and with looting and with all of that kind of stuff in regards to a PvP environment where we just have to think about everything in terms of, okay, how in a PvP scenario, how can someone exploit this to you know just in that kind of context. And so we've received a lot of feedback through different playtests and stuff from players who don't necessarily want a PvP experience. They want this kind of game where it's multiplayer and it's large scale multiplayer. They can go in the world, they can explore, they can kill enemies, they can harvest stuff, build a base, everything that you'd find in this kind of a loop, um, without the actual PvP part of it, where another player can come and raid your base and take everything that you worked hard for. And so this has been a big point of debate because we just keep going back and forth on, well, if people are expecting a Rust-like experience, then that's the kind of experience that we need to craft. But if we have all these other players who want most, 95% of the same mechanics, but specifically don't want the PvP part, then what do we do with them? And so that's been a big debate. And so kind of what we landed on is just PvP and PvE servers. So there'll be dedicated official servers for both, supporting PvP and PvE, and with a few differences. One, obviously, player against player damage and those kind of things won't take effect on the PvE servers, but there'll also be quite a few quality of life things. Like the one example we were talking about today is with being able to destroy building parts. So a lot of players have got into our game during playtests, and they get frustrated because there's a 5-minute rule when you place a building part, where you can demolish it within 5 minutes, but then after 5 minutes it's permanent. And it can be destroyed with like raiding tools and explosives and stuff like that. But like just with your building tools, after the 5-minute timer expires, you can no longer demolish it. And so people who have come from PvE games that have building, they've voiced their frustration with this. That I built this early version of my base and expecting to be able to expand on it later, but I went to do it and it won't let me demolish it, and so now I'm frustrated because my base is stuck in this shape and I don't like it. Now I have to build a new base and stuff like that. On the PvP side, though, if you were to play a game like Rust, people over the 10 years that Rust have been out have found every single type of way to cheese a raid encounter between players with building parts. And so a common way to prevent that is to put a timer on building parts, so that you can't just place a part and then demolish it whenever you want. When you log in or log off, or as someone's raiding you, so you can't just like throw parts up and delete them and sneak your way through your base and whatever. So, anyways, so that's definitely been the biggest point of debate on our team, is just what do we hold true to in PvP versus PvE mechanics? And the compromise that we made after lots of debate is we'll just have 2 separate servers. So for the people who want like the hardcore PvP experience, they can have that, and for the people who want the PvE experience that still is challenging, but they want quality of life things, like for example not having a time restriction on being able to demolish and redesign their base, they can have that too. So we'll have both, and that's kind of the compromise. Okay, and the last question for today is there any new content or a larger map size for the Steam launch since the last test? And the answer is yes, but it's a little bit nuanced. So in terms of content, there's a ton that has not been ever publicly available in a build for players to experience yet. So there's a little bit of jargon in here, but anyone who's come from similar games, it's somewhat the same. But the largest points of interest in our game are called monuments, or called major monuments. So you could think of that as like a castle or a city or something like that. So there are these larger points of interest where a lot of things, like high risk reward areas. So in the public builds that we've had so far, we've only ever had 2 of those available, and we actually have 6 total. So the next time we do have a public playtest, there will be those additional 4 major monuments in there that nobody's experienced yet. So that's one thing. And then in addition to those, there will also be more than 10 minor monuments. So they're smaller points of interest to explore and that have different features and things. We've also been working on adding a whole bunch more wildlife variety. Like I mentioned earlier with the lore stuff, we're adding a new main story quest chain that will take several hours to complete. Again, it's optional, but it'll be there. So So in terms of content, there's actually a whole bunch that nobody has experienced before that will be in the next public playtest. So the answer is yes to that part. There definitely is more content. Um, and then the second part of that about the larger map size, the answer is yes, but it's again it's a little bit more nuanced. So on at the time of our early access launch, the map will be slightly larger than people have experienced, but that's mostly just to accommodate the extra points of interest that I talked about that we're going to add. Um, so it will be larger, but not like it won't be like many times larger. It'll just be large enough to make sure that there's enough room for all the additional points of interest that we're adding. Um, and where it gets a little bit nuanced is that world size will actually be tied to the server owner, and it's seed based. So basically it's variable. So anytime you join a different server, the map will be slightly differently, or not even slightly. It'll be differently shaped. Um, the points of interest will be kind of rearranged. The size will be bigger, smaller, slightly, and things like that. So any time that a server is wiped, it'll also change shape, and kind of get all mixed up and everything. So there's not like one standard map size that will be available all the time. It'll kind of vary a little bit. Um, and this is also something that will be available on like from a server settings standpoint. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, but we will have dedicated official servers, but we'll also have an option for players to host their own servers through our either through our official server partner or through other means, but we'll have both. So from our end, when we have like the dedicated official servers, we'll kind of have a variety of again PvP and PvE options, and then also map sizes and population targets. So it's possible that we have maybe like the max size map, and we have it tuned all the way up to 150 players, or maybe we have a large map and we tune the player base down all the way to 20 or something, so that everybody has more space to mess around. Or we shrink it way down and reduce the points of interest and make it small with a small player base. So anyways, the options are kind of limitless, but so the short answer is yes, the full map will be larger than anybody's played before, but not a ton larger. And it'll vary. So, and if players do decide to host their own servers outside of the official dedicated ones, that's something that you can choose from a server owner perspective. So, kind of up to those things. Okay, well, I mentioned that we were going to do just run through 4 questions today, and those were the 4. I hope you learned something new that you didn't know before about Lost Isle. Again, we're gonna be doing these pretty regularly. The most often that we'll do them is once a month. So feel free to jump into our Discord server and keep asking questions in the Ask the Devs forum channel. You can submit them there. Like I said, sometimes we'll just respond directly through text. Other times we'll save them to answer through a video like this. So either way, we try to get back to everybody. We like to try to stay active in the community and take everybody's feedback and make pivots and things like that. So we really appreciate all the questions that we have received so far, and we hope to get more. All right, we'll see you next time.